Welcome to today's lecture about the political and legal environment around the world. And as we're going to see, the political and legal environment varies widely around the world. We'll start kind of as a basis using the United States, and though we have a couple of other European students in here, I think we'll see enough similarities that'll give us the foundation to look at, and then we're just going to kind of wander around the world, and I'm going to show you how you're going to use this information to help you market to your customers in your country, or to help you understand the consumption habits of consumers in your country for your particular product. And so I'll sort of start here with just a quick review of Democrats and Republicans, and I've talked about this a little bit in class already. And I apologize. The reason I'm doing a video is I don't have much of a voice right now. Right now, or if you take a long-term view and look at the last 20 years or so, you will see about a third of the country identifying as conservative and right-leaning, about a third of the country identifying as liberal and left-leaning, and then about a third of the country identifying, on and off at least, as independent, though most of that third, or maybe about half of that third, definitely has leanings. In other words, they declare themselves an independent, but they always vote for a Republican or a Democrat. And we talk about, this really walks through a nice idea of how the parties have typically stood. Some changes happened. The Trump Republican Party is no longer the same as the traditional Republican Party. And the response of Democrats has been to move, well, we're not sure yet, but appears to be likely to move from what we call center-left to more leftist. So if you think of, again, over the last 20 years, much of the country, because of these heavy number of independents, Republicans tended to be more center-right, Democrats tended to be more center-left, and now there is less centrality left. There are probably no more than, for example, about 8 or 9 senators who would probably identify as centrist, maybe as many as a dozen. I maybe shorten them a little bit. And a number of areas where where the parties have significant disagreement, but showing less from this, and certainly more positive about politics and our culture of fear when news is made by trying to panic us about everything. There are an awful lot of things that our parties do agree on. And I do believe that America is going to remain centrist. We may swing back and forth between left and right for a while. Typically, whoever's the president, the other party will have very strong midterm elections, and it tends to balance things out. And on and off over time, I have actually voted, so I would make sure that, or as best possible, that we had a president from one party and at least one congressional, either the Senate or the House, would be in the hands of the other party. Plays an important check and balance and requires us to do at least some level of compromise. Okay, so as we move around the world, the first thing I would do when I was doing my assignment would be click in politics, and I have here Brazil, but this will be the politics of your country. It'll give you some of the facts you can use when you're factually describing it, and it'll lead you to start making the kinds of inferences based on culture you're going to need to do this assignment. Just as we did with economics, I'm going to ask you to begin with culture and say, you know, how did the political system arise out of the culture of the country, and how does an understanding of the political system through a cultural lens help us understand how to market. Okay, so now let's start to wander around the world, and we'll start to talk about some of the many ways the rest of the world differs from the United States in terms of politics. And I move by too fast here. This begins with a party system. And in the United States, while we have had green parties and other temporary parties, we've been basically a two-party country forever, and that either a Democrat or a Republican has been president since I'm all the way back into the late 1800s in my thinking, and so I'll have to say I don't know when, but way more than our lifetimes and way more than my parents' lifetimes. And as you go to other countries, what you'll see here is not two parties or dominant parties, or in some cases even one party, but a whole bunch of parties. And since many of these countries will have a system that requires something called parliamentary majorities, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these parties will have to get together to develop what's called a ruling coalition. And so as we're flashing down through here, a lot of really small countries here, but we hit Australia and Austria, definitely not small countries, and you see the same issues, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parties. And those two parties that have formed together to create a majority in Parliament. So in this case, if either of these loses even a tiny amount of support, one of these other smaller parties can sign on, and you'll have a brand new government. Governments can turn over much more frequently, can be much less stable in a parliamentary system. You get to places like Brazil, and I got to kind of laugh at this one, but here's all the parties, and here's how many parties had to agree to sign on to end up with a 50% majority in Parliament. So just incredibly balkanized. Balkanized is a word we use. It's a bunch of really, or it was a bunch of really small countries, all with very different interests. And so you'll end up with socialists signing up with democracies and all sorts of odd and unusual things. You will occasionally hit countries like China. China's the place you'll hit it hard. There is only one political party. And that political party is so powerful they don't allow any competition in terms of politics. They don't even, there's a major crackdown right now on religion. Just read a story about a church of 12,000 people who now has to meet in the streets. Their meeting location was confiscated. You have a very, very, very narrow set of things you can say about God and religion in China. And the Communist Party and the United Front is totally dominant. Last time I checked, there were it seems like about 10, 15 million people, members of the Communist Party, and they rule a country of 1.5 billion, and they rule it completely. And as you talk to Chinese, we get a lot of visitors here. I host a lot of professors. And while those professors may well know a member of the Communist Party, it's very different in our system in that is not a person you would go to try to express your views and you're interested in change. So it's not like you call up your representative and say, I really don't like where that road's going. I'd like to see it moved. That'd get you into all sorts of trouble in China. So again, here you have the countries that are autocratic dictatorships. But most of the world will have, anywhere from 5 or 6 to, a dozen or more political parties. and understanding, which luckily you can do, leading the political party allows you to click and go and find out exactly what that party does. India here is a little bit misleading in that really here they just dump a whole lot of people in the National Democratic Alliance, and it kind of says that has 13 constituent parties. So while this only shows two major parties in India, there are really many, many dozens of major parties in India. So think your way back again to our cultural dimensions and think about how individualism, for example, might play a part in this. Power distance might play a part of it. All sorts of things might impact how you end up with a country who has many, many different parties. Here's Ireland, 8 million people, and it's like everybody has to have their own party. In fact, we laugh at it here in Jackson County. We have more churches per capita than, unless I've heard this report. I've never tried to check it out, but it makes a lot of sense to me. We have more churches per capita than any other county in the United States. Even in my 5-minute drive to campus, I passed 4 or 5 different churches, maybe 6. I'd have to count them. There's a whole bunch of them. And not because people have beliefs that particularly differ, but because something we call the Scotch-Irish culture is like that mass independence. Remember, the United States was the most independent, or individualist, not independent, individualist of countries. And what happened? Same thing happened in my church I grew up in. My great-grandfather founded it when he couldn't get along with the people that were going to the church that he originally went to. He also had to rebuild the church 3 times because those other church members burned it down. So when you say something like this, just a whole lot of people that want to have power and decision making as close as possible to themselves. Okay, here is a corruption index. I'm not going to dig real far into this, but clearly corruption is going to be something that you have to take a look at as part and parcel of your country's politics. And you can click on some things and all sorts of stories and read about their data. But the data on the face of it, I could click on this. Yeah, I can. On the face of it, looks pretty sound here. In this case, Canada, and it appears the Scandinavian countries, several of them, not Finland over here. I believe this is Finland. Now, since I've got a Finnish student, I'm going to be really embarrassed if I'm wrong. And the United States is the next level up, I guess, which probably fits pretty well. We do have a fair amount of corruption. We have an incredible amount of money flowing into politics. You can't expect that not to have some influence. But look at all the reds and the dark reds and the super dark reds. These are countries where corruption is rampant. The rule of law hardly exists at all. You'll see here, this is true of all of the Caribbean. This is this is Jamaica off here to the side, extremely corrupt. Haiti and Dominican Republic, Cuba, Mexico, very high levels of corruption, often driven by drug money. So again, what's going on in the culture? Why have these countries, I think if you asked any individual at the bottom of a society, should we be corrupt? You'd get a lot of no's, but still, those people with power, and maybe again, power distance index has something to do with it, those people with power are happy with corruption because you can stash away $1 billion, and it doesn't really matter where you live after that. You can take off and go wherever you want. This is a report on immigrants and immigrant populations. And what it says, if you start in the top, well, it actually doesn't, that's an average, so that's a bad number to look at. But it shows foreign-born population. These are people who were not born in the country they are currently living in. It shows the percentage of foreign-born people, and it shows the percentage of the world foreign-born population and the percentage of the population within that country. So you've got to be a little careful as you're looking. And the United States, at about 330 million people, has roughly 20% of the, and the way to say this, kind of look at this, a very significant portion of all people who weren't born, who are not living in the country they were born in, live in the United States. And as a percent of the total population, it's also quite high. As we go here, we will see a few people that are going to be pretty misleading, because this just says live here. In the United Arab Emirates, they have to import all their workers. They are not citizens. They do not vote. Okay? So there is a pretty substantial difference in the types of people and the places you live, and the number of people who are immigrants. Jordan has also had an incredible overflow of people out of both Syria and Israel, Palestinians out of Israel, and so has an incredibly high number of its population. But as we return here, the United States has 19% of the world-born foreign population, 46 million people, 14% of the total population, far higher than anywhere else in the world. Germany has stepped up and accepted a number of refugees, particularly from Syria and other places in the Middle East. But Germany is also desperate for talent and people. We looked at their age scheme, and they need a lot of people. So again, how does culture lead to what's something called nationalism? Generally speaking, nationalists do not like immigrants, do not want people that aren't like they are from other countries coming into the country. And we have definitely increased our nationalist policies over the last 2 years. Trump actually ran, and probably his strongest position was on, excuse me, not only securing the borders, but also dramatically decreasing the number of legal immigrants who are allowed into the United States. So major change for us. We've always welcomed immigrants. We have an issue associated in what type of immigrants do we allow in. And in the past, we've allowed something called chain immigration, in that if you had a family member here, you were more likely to get in. Economists would argue, and a number of politicians, including some from both sides, would argue that we should now move that to merit and only let really smart people in. And in the United States, as in really the rest of the world, if you've got enough money, it doesn't really matter. There is a type of visa in the United States that requires you to invest X dollars. I don't know exactly how many dollars that is now, but once you invest that many dollars in a business here, you are allowed a residency, not citizenship, but a green card. So for many, many years, really odd, and people come to me occasionally for marketing consulting, and they'll give me the name of someone who is clearly foreign, who wants to develop a subdivision, because one of the easiest ways to invest in a business is to buy a bunch of land and start building houses. You don't have to build them real fast. You don't have to risk a whole lot of money. The land's likely to retain its value, and you can build your house there first, and come to the United States whenever you want. Abortion is a political bellwether. Abortion has many very complex, very personal. If you were religious, you were likely to feel different. It's just a really complicated, difficult area for people to deal with. I'm one of like most Americans, I have a very mixed feeling about abortions. My wife and I had 4 abortions between the time I was 33 and 40, and they were the ones called spontaneous abortions, known as miscarriages. And to us, trying to start a family, we lost 4 children. I mean, that's very much what it felt like to us. But we didn't have, all of the support for losses. We didn't have funerals. We didn't have names. It was just a horrible time for us until we were eventually able to have our children. And so it's deeply emotional. And I am certainly aware of that. And this kind of shows around the world. If you'd have done this 10, 15 years ago, you'd have seen a very different map. But abortion, basically the greens are abortion on demand, the reds are abortion, no abortion at all. So this is Brazil and Mexico. The remaining very strongly Catholic countries. And in between will be a variety, often allowing abortions only in instances where the mother's life is in danger. So again, looking at cultural roots here, Hofstede's dimensions might be useful to you in some way, but I think religion might be more useful. If you truly believe in life at conception and that there's a soul in that separate, distinct person. If you don't have religious beliefs, then that's just a few cells growing inside a mother. So religion does a lot, I think, to explain how we've ended up with such variation in laws. Okay, so let's talk about putting people in jail. One of the things we want our politicians to do is keep us safe. And so let's take a look at who puts the most people in jail. And we will find here, now El Salvador, most of the people in jail in El Salvador may well need to be in jail. It's the most violent, one of the most violent, murderous, corrupt countries in the world. But right here on top, in one of our most dubious leading the world in, is the United States, 655 per 100,000 population. And as you look at our neighbors here on this list, doesn't make you feel real good about being a leader of this list. These are not, many of these are not admirable countries. As we get down into the low numbers, I'm going to just kind of slide up here to some places which have a reasonable population. Countries like Japan, Liberia, Sweden, Finland, you'll find all of Northern Europe and Scandinavia here with very, very low incarceration rates. Okay. So the question then, the immediate question comes, or the argument's always been, well, some places people commit more crimes, so of course they're going to have more people in jail. And before we go away from this, though, I hope you can see kind of again from Hofstede's dimensions, the reason the U.S. puts so many people in jail is our politicians have found that a very good way to get elected. They can sell their hard on crime policies to get elected and throw them in jail. The modern day, throw away the key policy started with the Clintons, with Clinton 1, the first Clinton, uh, where we began to do things like pass three strikes laws, three felonies and you're gone. And those felonies might be, an ounce of pot three times. So let's look at crime here. First, prison population total. This is not an insignificant issue because prisoners cost us a whole lot of money. I think the per capita prisoner cost, yeah, look it up, or you can look it up. Somebody can correct me if I'm wildly wrong, but my recollection is somewhere in the $50,000 range or so. So 50,000 times 2 million is a whole lot of money that we spend in the United States just to put people in jail. And we end up with 500,000 more than China, which has almost between 4 and 5 times our population. Okay. Plus, China has a whole heck of a lot of political customers. They'll throw you in jail for disagreeing with the Communist Party. So any way you look at it, the United States has a prison population and incarceration rate that's pretty wildly out of the norm of the rest of the world. So as you're looking at your country and you're comparing back to the United States, this is probably, along with our individualism, this is probably the place that we are most widely different from the rest of the world. Okay, so let's look at crime, and especially violent crime, and you can look at this because, again, one of the reasons we may have thrown a bunch of people in jail is maybe our people are killing a bunch of people. So I went with homicide as the most clear and violent of crimes. You can look at a lot of other types of crimes. You won't find anything particularly different. And so let's see how we are. And El Salvador is the one we mentioned that has a whole lot of people in jail, and a whole lot of those people probably deserve to be in jail. El Salvador is basically run by gangs now, and it's a horrible, frightening place to be. Honduras, Venezuela, Jamaica, on and off rank in the top 5 of the entire world. So you're more likely to be murdered in Jamaica than almost anywhere. Here's the rest of the Caribbean, okay? Here's a lot of Central and Latin America, much of this drug-driven. Dominican Republic, still kicking in. Russia, where there's a lot of corruption, but also a lot of people who drink a lot. Got to attach that one in. Iraq, with a lot of terrorist activities. And you might say, well, where's the United States? Well, all the way down at 87th. So again, let's go back up here. The most violent country in the world has a rate of 82 per 100,000 in murders. The United States is, what is that, 1/17th of the most, about 3 or 4%. We're about as violent as Greenland, which you don't think of as a place where a whole lot of people get killed. So kind of supports my theory again that it's mostly been a political issue. A lot of people we've been able to frighten a lot of people to vote based on crime statistics that don't really support the level of fear that we have. Now, that is not to say that in the United States there are not pockets in places, cities like Chicago right now. New Orleans historically has always had a very high homicide rate. So there are definitely some places that are dangerous. In fact, when I first started traveling to Jamaica a lot, my wife said, uh, wow, isn't that scary? And I said, yeah, they have a lot of murders. In fact, their murder rate at the time, I wouldn't be surprised if it's still pretty much true, was about the same as the city of New Orleans. So I said, I go to New Orleans every day to work. If I'm going to go to New Orleans, I might as well go to Jamaica. So in the United States, though, our murder rates are very isolated. I would say in the 16 years I've lived here, probably in 12 of those years, 10 or 12 of those years, we've had 0 murders. Okay, what have I got here? So I said, let's go all the way to the other end of laws and from homicide and say, how about cannabis? How about marijuana? How about something that I did a lot of when I was younger, don't do any at all of anymore, but a product that kind of walks the lines between legal and illegal and useful and unuseful and has plenty of pros and cons associated with it. A good friend who's dying of pancreatic cancer would love to have marijuana to help him with his appetite and his pain and his depression, but he lives in Georgia, where there aren't laws that allow it. And as you see here, still in much of the world, it's illegal in some places. We'll pick up over here. Should have started at the top of this chart. This is cultivation, this is medical, this is recreational. And there still aren't a lot of countries where it is legal and you end up with really stupid laws like you can possess and consume it but can't sell it. So how are you going to get it if you don't buy it? I don't know. That's really weird laws. But marijuana is pretty generally illegal around the world, reflecting kind of a conservative, approach to laws. In the United States, a place again where we're different in that, and I think a very wise move, our federal government, which has some powers in the states and some powers in the federal government, has pretty much allowed us to do some testing. And it's very early in the test now, but we're so far not seeing dramatic increases in any of the bad things we were kind of worried about. We're actually in in a lot of really mixed data, but in some places it looks like teenage use, which is what scares us most because teenage brains can actually be impacted by marijuana use in bad ways. But legalization doesn't seem to be causing a lot of the problems we were afraid it would. Uruguay is one of the few places you can go and everybody but foreigners can buy. So I always kind of laughed at this one. And I can imagine that there wouldn't be a very thriving recreational tourism for Uruguay, but it does look illegal. So as you slide all the way up this left column here, you don't have a single place in the world where it has been legalized and is now treated, for example, as alcohol is. Right, moving to a area of liberalism, social liberalism, that it has advanced very rapidly over the last 20 years. When I first became familiar with people in the gay community, obviously I've always known gay people. Very few of those were open though. Would have been in the mid-'80s when the AIDS epidemic was brand new, HIV, and when HIV was still a death sentence. In other words, everyone who got this disease died. And I had about 75 people reporting to me at the time, including a couple of wonderful young men who, working with probably 60 or 65 women, were really oases of calm. There were people who could take the minor feuds that tend to erupt anytime people get together and smooth them out. They both left and became volunteers in AIDS assistance programs. And so, beginning then, Magic Johnson was probably the original kind of the very first celebrity who began to bring the issue to American consciousness. And so, you know, in a very rapid period, 25 or 30 years, we have moved to same-sex marriage. Wasn't even imaginable even 10 years ago. And why? Well, you can say it was a Supreme Court decision, but it is also an opinion we share. Two-thirds of us are in favor, no restriction with open sex marriage. And every country above us will be, again, countries you can look at as more socially liberal. This is a very good kind of social liberalism in terms of a value. Look back in your cultural indexes and see which fit with those. And as you get down toward the bottom of the list, you'll see the very opposite. Often driven by strong, as I said, religious opinions, can be either Islamic, Christian, or just flat, you know, in Jamaica, which we often think of as sort of like America. Not when it comes to gay marriage. 95% of the population. And anytime you see these huge numbers here, that means that that entire group of people, gay, lesbian, transsexual, queer, LGBT, which means I left off one, bisexual, are certainly capable of being, at a minimum, persecuted, often thrown in jail. Let's see. So, you know, find your country on here, see where it lives. I'm seeing China immediately. Yeah, but China is a very strongly no homosexuality country. I'm not sure why they're not on the list. No, nobody's ever done a poll there because nobody will allow a poll. And this is poll-based information. And we talked about the 50 to 100 million men in China who, because of the abortion of females, have no opportunity for a female life partner. Well, a male life partner is also not an option. So it's a really scary social experiment. You have 50 to 100 million men, and this is both in China and in India, who will never be able to be in an open relationship, whose only access to sex will be illicit or illegal or prostitution. And man, that is a scary set of people. I can't imagine that things are going to come look good from that. All right, I got a bunch more here. I'm going to talk about probably only one more before my voice wears out and before the video gets too long for you to watch it. And this is military expenditures. One of the things we expect our governments to do is keep us safe. They keep us safe from crime, but they also keep us safe from other people that want to destroy us or attack us or take our stuff. Key here is, of the total military expenditure in the world, the United States has over a third. This is unprecedented. This has been true basically since the end of World War II, and we spend a fortune on our military. Nobody else does. It's long been a source of political contention. It is very easy with many people to sell high expense budgets. And it's also very easy with many other people, and you can make this a right-left issue very easily too, not to. One way to look at it, now these are slightly different lists and slightly different numbers, but the percentages work out pretty much the same here, is the United States spends as much as the total of about the next 15 or 20 countries, okay? So you want to know why we're the world's policeman? We're the country that people turn to when violence becomes the only resort, where we have to, at some point, perhaps consider military intervention in Venezuela. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it should happen, but we're it. We're the bottom line. Again, you get back to Hofstede's dimensions. What is it that led us to the point where we are insistent? And you can also hear, it's a very unusual source coming out the Republican Party. And one of the ways Trump has changed Republican Party is a very strong frustration that we are spending all this money, and for example, the United Kingdom, Japan, and Germany aren't. They're spending not only many, many fewer dollars, but a smaller percentage of their economy. And if they're not having to pay for their defense budget because we're paying for it, they can spend their money on things like health care, where we can't. This is money that's lost to us. Lawyers per capita is put on here because it's interesting. Business people always like to laugh at lawyers and make fun of them. But we do have an incredible amount of lawyers compared to the rest of the world. We've got good laws, but the more complex your laws get, especially your tax laws and things like that, the more lawyers you end up with. We have 40 times as many as lawyers per capita as Japan, which is a very similar industrialized society. So good news, I guess, is new lawyers aren't making much money anymore. The average lawyer still makes a good bit of money, but the flood to law school as a way to get rich seems to be declining. You also might be happy to know, unless you're planning to be a lawyer, that the job satisfaction among MBAs is, last time I looked, I can't say this because it's been a couple of years, but historically, looking at it over a 20 or 30 year period, has always been higher than lawyers. A lot of lawyers get really tired of being lawyers eventually. Last thing here is I thought it'd be kind of interesting to look at, because we've had a lot of changes in who we want to allow in. But you may or may not know of the people who want to come to the United States on a visa to visit. Most can't. Many can't. Most can't. These are refusal rates. And what it says is, of the people in Afghanistan who want to come visit the United States, we tell about half of them no. And as you look down the list, and you get to countries, these are only high risk. So if there's not a country on this list, they can come, and they'll come in numbers much higher than this, because I think everywhere else, 90% or more of the people, maybe 95% of the people who want to come are allowed to. But as you look at countries like Jamaica next door, some of you may have been to Jamaica for a spring break. All you got to do is, last time I went, didn't even have to have a passport. I traveled there a lot. You can go party, you can have fun, you can stay in fancy resorts. In Kingston, Jamaica, the capital of the country, at about 5 o'clock in the morning, the line starts forming, and by the time the American consulate opens at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, whenever they open, there'll be an average of 500 or 600 people waiting to try to go to Jamaica. All of them will have relatives there. And again, in this case, this is a much lower number than I used to look at. The number used to be 80% of people would be denied. But about half of those people are denied, and a whole lot of people have given up on trying to come, because basically in Jamaica, before we allow you to come here, you have to demonstrate that your ties are so strong to Jamaica that you'll come back, and usually that means you have to demonstrate that you're wealthy and that much of your wealth is in Jamaica. Okay, so I'm going to shut down here, see how long this is, process it, upload it, and you'll be seeing it before 10:30. I will see you on Wednesday. I'm going to go back here, though, backing up one more place, because I'm making adjustments and I'm trying to rewrite these things a little bit better every week. Okay, so I'm going to stick with the description, talk about how I'm just working on my wording here. Countries, culture led to its politics and laws, and how your company might use knowledge of your marketing activities. Okay, so I'm trying to say the I want to stay real consistent. I want everything we look at from now on to be through the eyes of culture. So I want to see that embedded in all of your assignments. So about one page in purely description. Okay, you got lots of stuff to describe. You can pick among those things from the things that are important, and then talk about how your country's culture led to its politics and laws, and how your company might use knowledge of the politics and laws and marketing activities. See you on Wednesday.